Hi, this is Rishabh Rajan for Ask.Audio, and in this video, we're going to take a look at the KeyStep Pro from Arturia. The KeyStep Pro is a 37-key sequencer with 4 independent sequencer tracks. You can record up to 16 patterns per track. Each sequencer pattern can have up to 64 steps and can contain 16 notes per step, so it's a polyphonic sequencer. 3 of the 4 sequencer tracks have a built-in Arpeggiator mode, and one of them has a drum trigger mode. Lots of connectivity options on this device. You get 4 separate CV outs for the 4 separate voices. Each voice has a pitch, velocity, and gate out. You also get 8 separate drum gate outputs, as well as clock in outs. Not to forget the 5-pin DIN connections, you get 2 outs and 1 in, as well as a USB MIDI option. Now in this video, I'm going to highlight 10 different features of the KeyStep Pro in no particular order, just features that I found to be very useful. There is a built-in metronome on this device. There's a speaker on the front that outputs a signal, and on the back over here you can adjust the level for the metronome. It even has a dedicated output, so you can feed it to a separate monitor if required. One of the features I like a lot with hardware sequencers is the ability to create polymetric patterns. The drum sequencer on this first track here has that ability. I'm going to go ahead and sequence a pattern here. So let's start with the kick. The kick is selected, and now I can enter in the notes for the kick sequence. Let's have a listen to just this. Alright, now I'm going to bring in the snare. Selected the snare, add in the notes for the snare, and lastly the hi-hat. I'll just add one on every step. Alright, so that's a very straightforward pattern. Now let's make this polymetric. If I hold down Shift here, I can switch from mono to poly mode. It's still a monophonic drum sequencer, meaning each step can only have one sound at a time, but I can adjust the length of each voice. Right now when I select the kick, we can see the steps for the pattern. This is for the snare. I'm going to add in another hit here. So right now this pattern is 1 bar long or 16 steps long. To make this polymetric, I will have to make each lane or each voice be at a different length. To do this, I'll select a voice and then hold down last step and tap on any of the steps here. So let's say I tap 13. So now the kick drum is only going to have 13 steps. Let's change it for the snare as well. Holding down last step. Let's try 11. So the kick's 13 steps long, the snare is 11 steps long. Let's change the hi-hat as well. I'll change up the pattern so we'll actually hear a difference. In fact, let's make it 2 measures long. So now the hi-hat has 32 steps. But I'm going to change that by holding down last step. Let's tap on 11 over here. So that will be 16 plus 11, 27 steps long. So that's how to create a polymetric pattern on the drum sequencer in the KeyStep Pro. Alright, so we've looked at creating polymetric sequences with the drum sequencer, but each track can also have a polymetric independent sequence. Let's listen to track 4 here. I'll mute the other ones. Alright, so that's the pattern. I want to change the length of this pattern. So I'll do the same thing, hold down last step, tap 12 here. So now this pattern is 12 steps long. Let's access this next sequence here, the bass line. It's full 4 bars long or 64 steps long. It kind of goes along with this track here, which is the chord progression. So let's change the length on this one. Hold down last step. Tap on this third page here, and then tap on a step. Do the same for the bass. Now the bass line and chord progression are kind of offset because they're different lengths. But let's also do this to the drum track now. So not individual drum sounds, but the entire drum track is now just 14 steps long. So that's how you can create a 4-part polymetric sequence on the KeyStep Pro. This one's one of my favorites. You can create variations using just 1 bar on the sequencer. So let me just quickly sequence a hi-hat pattern here. So that's again just 1 bar long. Now instead of having to sequence a second, third and fourth bar, I can hold down a step and then tap one of the measure buttons here to disable it for those particular bars. So you'll see that that particular step does not play when it repeats the second and the fourth time. Even though I've sequenced just 1 bar, we have essentially created a 4 bar pattern. I'll do the same thing for the kick. Alright, so I don't want this for all the 4 repeats. So I'll hold down a step and disable it for the first bar, disable this one for the second, and this one for the fourth. Same for the snare. Added multiple hits here, but I'm now disabling it for some of the repeats. So that's the 1 bar variations, sequence 1 bar, and create 3 additional bars of variations for a total of a 4 bar sequence. This one's a fairly simple and straightforward feature, but very helpful. So each of the 4 tracks can be muted individually. So there are mute buttons for each of the tracks. Very easy to build an arrangement like this by muting and unmuting individual tracks. But we can also solo individual tracks by holding down Shift and tapping the mute button. Now solo only works on an individual track basis, meaning you can't solo multiple tracks, but you can mute multiple tracks. So that's how it works on the KeyStep Pro. There are some pretty interesting randomization and probability options on the KeyStep Pro. On this 4th track here, I have a sequence pre-programmed. So let's look at randomizing this. You can see here we have a bunch of options which I can access by holding down Shift. First one here is randomizing the note order. And you can keep tapping it to create additional random variations. There's a random octave option that works too. There's also random notes, but then it does go out of key. Now we can bring it back into key by making use of the scale quantization options here. You can see here we have a bunch of different scales. Let's switch to major. So now it is still a random sequence, but at least it's fixed to the major scale. Alright, so that can be fun to play with. Now aside from that, we also have this randomness dial, but technically it's more like a probability dial. So we can set a probability for each steps of whether they would occur or not. So I'm holding down individual steps and bringing down the probability dial here. So now as the pattern plays through, those steps may or may not play because of the probability being set to a lower value. This can be a great way to introduce random rests into a sequence. Alright, one other randomization feature is on the sequencer playback direction. So right now it's playing back in the forward direction. But we also have the random mode here, and you can see just randomly scrolling through the different steps. There's also a walk option, which is kind of linear, but it kind of steps back once in a while. So it's mostly straight, but once in a while it'll give you some randomization. Another one of my favorite features is the time division option, and this can be great for live improvisation. So right now we're still on track 4, and I'm going to adjust its time division. Holding down Shift, right now you can see it's set to a 16th note. I've now made it half time, so it's an 8th note. can also go up to 32nd, as well as a quarter. We can also access triplet variations. Let's try this on the drums. So it's at 16th, halftime now. Bring in a triplet variation, back to 16th. So as you can see, this can be a lot of fun to improvise with in a live performance scenario. Another fun live performance feature is over here with this beat repeat style effect. So if my pattern is running, and if I tap and hold on any of these touch style buttons, I can get a quarter note repeat, an eighth note repeat, a 16th note repeat, or a 32nd note repeat. And of course you can play around with that. Let's talk about swing and time shift. So there is a global swing amount here, as you can see there, but there's also one for each track. You can see here for individual tracks, you can set the swing amount. A side note, these knobs are touch sensitive. So when you just touch the knob, it shows you the parameter. Even these knobs over here. Alright, going back to a swing, I have this hi-hat pattern pre-sequenced. Let's introduce some swing into this pattern. Right now it's completely straight. Alright, pretty straightforward, adding swing to a pattern. But you can also choose to time shift individual steps to create a more customized feel. So I'm just going to randomly time shift these steps. So you'll notice the hi-hat sounds a bit inconsistent. Let's add a kick beneath that. Snare as well. So that's time shift, but of course we can also combine time shift along with the swing feature. Pretty cool. But yes, I really like the time shift feature for individual steps on a sequence. So 3 of the 4 tracks have a built-in arpeggiator. Now one big drawback of the arpeggiator is that you can't record the arpeggiation. So right now I'm on this track 4. I need to hit play to hear the notes being arpeggiated. And now we can hear the arpeggiation. It follows the clock. But unfortunately, I can't record this. If I hit the record button, let go, nothing got recorded in. There is a hold feature, so you can get a hands-free performance, but it's not really recorded in. If I switch to another pattern, it's not switching for some reason. Alright, there we go. We're on pattern 6. We're still hearing the same notes because hold was on. If I turn off hold, and now you can see we've lost those notes. Going back to pattern 5, we don't have those notes here as well. Alright, but aside from that, it's still a pretty good arpeggiator. Hold is on right now, so it's holding the notes. If I hold down shift here, with these keys I can change the octave range for the arpeggiator. That can be pretty useful. We also have the time division feature here. That works for the arpeggiator as well. The scales also work for the arpeggiator, so it will quantize to specific scales here. You can also set up your own user scales. We can change the note order, up, down, exclusive, inclusive, random, original order, and lastly polyphonic mode, where it just repeats the entire chord. You can get this nice octave jump when the octave feature is on in this poly mode. Alright, so those are 10 features on the KeyStep Pro that are worth checking out. I hope you found this video helpful. Stay tuned for more.